North Carolina office of the Nature Conservancy. We're over in Durham, and we're part of the Eastern Division of the Nature Conservancy, which is pretty much the whole eastern United States. And our Eastern Regional Office is based in Boston. They did this analysis that I'm going to tell you about. And I'm going to give you a quick overview of various parts of it. But the whole thing, the report and all the data is published on the web, so you can delve into it as much as you want. It's on Conservation Gateway. So, all right, Mr. Fancy.
What is this?
Okay, I may point at something. So, conserving the stage, I'll go through what that concept means, and then this climate resilience project that we've been working on, and results in the Southeast, and if I have some time, maybe talk about some analysis and comparisons. Here's the report. Mark Anderson is our head scientist up in Boston, and he oversaw this with a team of about 6 GIS analysts, everybody having their little piece. So when I was sort of studying up for the presentation, I was asking different people different questions, trying to anticipate what you might ask, but Doug, you can't ask me any questions. All right. First, they did it for the Northeast, and they were studying how diversity is tightly associated with the physical environment. Here are some examples of geology and soil texture and how landforms, how these things correlate with different aspects of biodiversity, and trying to tie that to the physical environment. So we have the data for what species are where, and then we have the data for the physical environment, trying to sort of separate those to look at what would be resilient to climate change. Looked at a bunch of different factors, seeing how they correlate, different aspects of elevation, the area of the state, latitude, number of geology classes, number of landforms. I'll talk a little about the landform model. And then various aspects of temperature and precipitation, and then how those correlate with vascular plant species, vertebrates, and invertebrates. Did this for 17 states and Canadian provinces. Oh, and one thing I wanted to point out that I'll reference later is this brown here. So they started looking at the Northeast, but you'll see this small area of the Northeast becomes a much bigger factor when you start looking at the Southeast. So in looking at all the different variations, the importance values, they decided these are the ones that are highly correlated as far as simplifying the analysis to see where biodiversity and resilience lies. Geology classes, calcareous bedrock, latitude, maximum elevation, elevation range, as well as some temperature and coldest month and things like that. But these were the ones that they decided to focus on with this analysis. And here you see the correlation of estimated number of species and actual number of documented species for these different states and provinces. And latitude was mentioned as one of the correlations. You'll see Virginia, which was the southernmost state in this analysis, is estimated to be the most diverse and is actually the most diverse. So Mark Anderson was feeling pretty comfortable about using this as an analysis. It's good. It's a strong case. Then we move to the Southeast to expand this analysis. And you'll see our ecoregions are these black lines. We're looking at things in terms of ecoregions as well as states. So all the data is collected at the state level, but we tend to analyze things on the ecoregional level. And in North Carolina, Southern Blue Ridge, Piedmont, and Coastal Plain are 3 ecoregions to make sure you're comparing apples to apples in the analysis. Now that brown I mentioned has taken over the southeast part of the analysis. It's at least 50% of the area. And being able to move from a northeast, New Hampshire, bedrock close to the surface, mountains, elevation kind of analysis to how we quantify all this coastal plain was a big challenge to doing it for the southeast. So the correlation is not quite as tight now when you add in the southeast, but it's still very respectable. And you see Virginia's been joined by some other large southern states in the predicted as well as actual number of species that exist in the state. And this is looking at geology, limestone, latitude, and elevation range. Here are just some different examples for this concept of conserving the stage. And we've got a few from North Carolina in here. Shining Rock Wilderness, good example of a granite stage. And down here is Fort Bragg with coarse sand. And I don't know if you can see this, but Ashe County, if you don't know if you've ever been up to Three Top and Bluff Mountain, but amphibolite rock is part of what determines the biodiversity there. A few different papers were referenced for this, conserving the stage. Hutchinson talks about evolution and how you need to just save the stage for which evolution to happen. That was a 1965 paper that Mark built this on. And in looking at how we're doing conserving the stage now, looking at protected lands, this is some different. These are examples of rock types, and I'll show you some more of that later, as well as elevation, the low, medium, high, and coastal. And you can see that we've got a lot of mountaintops protected as far as the percentage of the mountaintops that are out there. And coastal, we have a good number of coastal areas protected across the southeast. But then when you get into these other types of landforms, there's not represented as well in protected lands. So as far as looking at climate change and what species, how many species will be supported, that's seen as a limiting factor. So for each of these geophysical settings, where are the sites that will be most resilient to climate change? Compiled geology and soil maps, soil texture maps, that was highly correlated, as well as elevation, and broke that into different classes. So it ended up being 35 total classes across the southeast that they would correlate the natural heritage element occurrence data to. Are y'all familiar with natural heritage element occurrence data? This is where the rare and endangered and the highly diverse natural communities occur. So here are just different examples of communities on calcareous soils, communities on mafic, ultramafic soils, and those can run across ecoregions and states. So it's looking across the entire southeast at what the rare communities are and what their geophysical settings are. And here's just a map of the ecoregions and all the settings, and you can see that some of them are in more than one ecoregion. Here's a zoom in, sorry for the low res map there. Just showing the same thing within our 3 ecoregions here. So looking at what makes a site resilient to climate change. Ultimately looking for the highly resilient. It would sustain function and diversity, have many options and alternatives, and many native and specialist species, versus a vulnerable area that is fragmented and doesn't have a whole lot of biodiversity. This landform model, this is just a picture kind of showing that. A mountaintop's a good example of an area that has a lot of landforms in a small area. So You can have a lot of species and a lot of microclimates, and they all can move within each other as far as looking at climate change. And then on the right we have connectedness. So ultimately the two data sets that came out of it that we're working with are landscape diversity and connectedness. More heterogeneity, more options for species with the landform model. And this just illustrates the variety of different landforms that you can find within one small area when you're looking at a mountaintop kind of landform model. So within this circle, which is a 100-acre circle, there are 8 different types of landforms. So then when you translate this to the southeast, you see the mountains is kind of biased. It has a lot more landforms than when you get down to Florida, because it's looking at that elevation range and topography. It's kind of biased in that way. So as far as trying to incorporate the coastal plain, we had to come up with another way to quantify that. I zoom into North Carolina, you see the green is a high number of landforms and the brown is a low number of landforms. But when you look at our biodiversity, there's a whole lot of biodiversity on the coastal plain. So this doesn't match up when it comes to a southern landscape as far as reflecting where we have a lot of species. Added in an elevation range aspect to it. And worked with wetland density to try to bring out more of that diversity within the coastal plain. There were a lot of different experimentations with number of wetland patches within 100 acres, within a kilometer. Various experiments with that, seeing how it correlated. And this was especially important in Florida. In some parts of the southeast, like our mountains, you could see that things are correlating with the landform model, but in Florida, I remember specifically our director of science in Florida was hammering hard that this gets integrated well. So ultimately, the landscape diversity equation for the slopes, it was 2 times landform variety plus 1 time elevation range, and then for the flats, they added in the wetland density. So this illustrates the equation to determine landscape diversity. And there's a raw score, and then there's the within the ecoregion, looking at standard deviation. So when you look at it within the ecoregion, you can see the landform popping out as far as close to the fall line on the coastal plain. It comes up with more, and the foothills for the Piedmont, it ranks higher. So there's an unstratified data set and the stratified data set as far as how you want to compare things. And then the second data set is looking at the local connectedness. This is just an example of, so you have a place with lots of diversity and lots of landforms, but can those species move anywhere close to them? Are they hemmed in by large rivers, coasts, development, farm fields, that sort of thing? So with this, there was a land cover data set with a resistance score given for each land cover type. So the connectedness from our point of view is for species to move and for processes like fire to take place that these natural areas rely on to exist. So here's the unstratified and stratified connectedness scores, and we have a lot of feedback from that. I think they'll probably be redoing some of this based on feedback. It tends to favor the river corridors a lot with when you're looking at the land cover and connectedness. we have a big longleaf pine initiative across the southeast in the Nature Conservancy, and Fort Bragg doesn't pop up at all as being connected. So why is that is one thing we're delving into for future iterations of this. And also there's a coastal resilience project that we're working on now, trying to determine what is coastal resilience with a whole different project than looking at terrestrial resilience across the southeast. And ultimately, these are the data sets, and you can download them and look at them at your leisure. It's very interesting, and we're incorporating it into how we work with buying land and making priorities. A lot of times, we'll be buying things that are not as connected, with part of our mission being to make it more connected, with things like red cockaded woodpecker habitat and things like that. So, final resilience score map combines both of the data sets. And so here's a zoom in with, you see mountaintops are considered highly connected. Here's Asheville, Hendersonville, not connected. And here's Charlotte, here's the Uaris. You know, different places that you expect do pop out. Fort Bragg, Bladen Lakes, Holly Shelter. And again, we'll see what we come up with here. With the threat of sea level rise, we weren't sure what to do with the outer coastal plain. So all the green, the above is basically greater than 0.5 standard deviation. And this is just one example of where we're taking it back to data we've created in the past. In the late 90s, the Nature Conservancy got together and decided where are the priority places for us to protect. Well, now if you look at what's resilient, are those still the same priorities? We're examining that across the eastern region. And the SALCC, they're also using it to examine their priorities. So it's all up on the Conservation Gateway. If you just, here's a complicated URL, but if you just look up Conservation Gateway, Nature Conservancy Terrestrial Resilience Analysis, you'll find it, and then all the downloads are here with the report and the metadata and everything, which is great for being able to, we want people to use it and react to it and give us feedback, because it will be an ongoing project. And here are all the folks who worked on it over the years with our conference calls, looking at what the GIS analysts, and being a GIS analyst myself, I could hear in their voices when they said, no, you need to change that, or you need to add wetland density. Okay, so it was a multi-year process, and we're pretty proud of it. Any questions? Yes.
Is that 30 meters?
30 meters.
So it matches up with the line sense.
Yes.
Have you thought about doing anything with the existing standard vegetation, such as canopy heights?
That is a Doug Newcomb question. No. Do you have ideas for how to incorporate that?
Well, we could at least redo the North Carolina portion of the area.
Mm-hmm.
And I think South Carolina's they're part of Virginia, so you might be able to use like these and add that in as a layer.
Okay, so the canopy height, I'm trying to think how that would fit in with.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. The canopy height incorporated into the model as an aspect of the.
Well, it gives you an idea of how far to go, maybe. Yeah, existing vegetation versus non-vegetation.
Right. Yeah, and I think with the resistance grid thing is problematic as far as the land cover data was fairly simple, and that could make it more complex for things like longleaf pine.
Right.
So. All right.